was just another cross. It was really kind of an Orthodox Christian cross that was used a lot, but it's just a cross. But they knew this would appeal to World War I veterans, and it kind of looked. It gave that cross, but if you turn it aside, it kind of looked like a circle, like we're all unified, that sort of thing. So that's where the swastika comes from. Then later on, Nazis would try to come up with this kind of fake mythology behind it, but all that's garbage. It's just very basic. And so with that, a shaky German republic would finally be created. That would be the basis of today's Germany. Their constitution, except for a few little quirks, is basically this, called the 5-Year Republic. These German states were created out of these old kingdoms, and to become a citizen, you had to ride on a unicycle in front of the Brandenburg Gate. I thought that was ridiculous too. I'm going to get those, and that's what we're just going to unicycle in the boat. You got one? That's how we get to school. So, and the big thing is, behind everything was this Treaty of Versailles. They blamed all their troubles on being forced to sign that treaty. And so here's Germany. I showed you this picture once before, but it's such a good one of Wilson, Clemenceau, and Lloyd George leading a noble Germany to the guillotine. And they lost their colonies. They blamed them for losing their army. Their economy was in shambles, civil war. And this represents the Germans working at a mill, basically working to pay back the reparations, worth $33 billion of reparations. And so this just hung on them. And it led to a pretty weak economy because they had to figure out a way to pay back these reparations. And how do you pay reparations? And the thing is, these countries wanted it in, not yet. We're coming to that. But they wanted it in German currencies called marks based upon gold. They want gold. So they got to get gold in a country that spent all their gold during the war. And so they had to do it by trade. Well, in 23, they had trouble paying. Oh, almost forgot something. And they blamed the whole thing. Why they were forced to sign a Treaty of Versailles. They called it Durchstaatsagenda. Can you guess what that means? The stab in the back. We had traitors within Germany that cheated us, and that's why we lost. They undermined the war effort at home and forced us to sign that Treaty of Versailles when we never really lost. That myth. So this is pretty obvious, the stab in the back. But here, this is supposed to represent like a banker and businessmen who got rich. But did you catch banker? What? Anti-Jewish. So this fits in there. Remember, this is the most racist, anti-Semitic time in history. And so, with that, let's get back to the reparations. Sorry I jumped the gun on that, but sound effects, pretty cool, huh? To pay back those reparations, they were having trouble in 23. And in 1923, they missed a payment. And the French occupied the most industrial region of Germany, this area called the Ruhr. And here is a famous picture of a German civilian standing down French occupation. Well, the workers in the Ruhr, basically the French came in and said, you're going to work and we're going to take your money for reparations. And they said, no. And they went on strike and the entire German economy shut down. Well, how do you get gold if no one's producing anything that people outside of Germany can buy? That strike, the French really screwed up. The French were going through their own political problems, so they did this to try to distract people. Here's French soldiers entering Cologne. He's standing on a big pile of iron ingots. And this is a German worker saying no to French soldiers. Won't work. I'm going to stand up for myself. 9. And this would trigger what we call hyperinflation. And hyperinflation was where the value of the German currency called marks dropped and prices skyrocketed. Now, hyperinflation, there has to be a number of events happen together. There's no chance of hyperinflation. It's not caused, a lot of people said it was caused by the debt Germany went into to borrow money to get out of paying the reparations. And that's simply not true. That wasn't the issue. The issue was this. They needed gold. Well, how do you do that? You have to have exports. Hard money's They needed money backed by gold. So they're going to sell manufactured goods from the Ruhr to England or the United States or France to get gold marks. Now, the Ruhr, once the French took over the Ruhr, exports quit. Exports quit. No hard money. No hard money. What's the problem? How's the government going to get money to pay back the reparations, which they can't pay back anyways at that time? They didn't have any tax revenues. That is the key element. Money that they needed to pay the trust wasn't coming in. No tax revenues coming in. If no tax revenues coming in, how's the government going to pay for things like people's pensions or other government functions? Or, for that matter, to issue to banks for they can loan or pay the reparations. Where do you get the money? You have to, it's called inflating the currency, but what that literally means, start printing money. Now, this printing money doesn't necessarily cause inflation. In fact, it doesn't if the government has tax revenues. But when people believe that there is no tax revenue of value coming in, people didn't trust the money they were printing. And if they didn't trust the money they were printing, if I don't trust the money, you better give me more. And prices just started to skyrocket. And what started as a dramatic price increase became crazy. By October of 1923, the inflation rate was approximately 100% an hour. Now, if you have a situation where tax revenues crash and there's no money that people trust coming into the government, where the government can control currency, combined with inability to bring money in, you can have hyperinflation like it's happening right now in Venezuela. It happened in Argentina, Brazil, and Zimbabwe in their lifetime. It can't happen here unless the government becomes so destabilized that they lose the power to tax and no one trusts the money we work. It could happen, but that's the way. By the way, do get this down. It wasn't debt. Debt did not cause this. And Germany would eventually start borrowing money, issuing bonds to pay back the reparations. That didn't really work either. But debt doesn't cause that. Debt doesn't cause hyperinflation. Because if you have tax revenues, people think you'll pay back your debt. It's when you don't have tax revenues. But this is, I'm not going to quit. So here, Germany already had inflation because of the war. And so this is a chart showing the number of dollars, or I'm sorry, the number of marks, the German currency to buy $1. And it, by nearly 1923, it was 100 marks to buy $1. That's the exchange rate. It's just like, what is it now? About 19 pesos for $1. Or now it's like 1,000 yen to buy $1. It's just an exchange rate. It doesn't mean one country's strong or not, just the exchange rate. But then look what happens once the French occupy the world. By November of 1923, $1 could get you 10 trillion marks. So money, as you can imagine, they would print in the morning would be worthless by the evening. That's the meaning of a kite out of money, those German marks. And so you have all these kind of comical pictures, but it showed how the economy broke down. I mean, how do you buy a loaf of bread? Just imagine if you had a savings account and you had inflation like that. You think you had money in the morning, what happened by the night? Gone. Or for your paycheck. Might be a good pay in the morning, bad pay at night. The whole financial system broke down. And we jump right to there's a 5 billion note mark, and they put them on paper, not really much thicker than toilet paper, because they had to print so many. Here is a 2 million mark postage stamp. It cost, by November of 1923, 200 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread. So people would bring wheelbarrows full of money. Here's a wheelbarrow of money getting your paycheck from the bank. Here's bringing bushels of money to buy one potato. That's a potato. That's where you get the comical pictures of, making, games out of money, wallpapering your walls with money. The whole financial system broke down. Yeah.
So then when it went back to normal, were they all really rich because they had so much money?
What they had to do is they basically made a different currency called the Voisin mark.
Oh.
And what they did basically, they said it was something, I think it was like 150 or 250 billion marks in one Voisin mark.
Oh wow.
In Brazil, they did that. They did like, I think it's called they call it super pesos or something like that. We've had nothing at all. Well, okay, the Confederacy was like this when they didn't have money in 1864, 1865. So that did happen there. But the middle class just went nuts. You can imagine how this just went. Can you imagine? You didn't have much money and all of a sudden it was gone. The middle class and the wealthy became very insecure. And the fear of this would begin to bleed into fear of communism. So here they are. This is after they switched currency. And Lauren has that. And here they're burning some of the old marks. I have a 50,000 mark note from early 23. And when I first got, oh, this is cool. Then they're everywhere. It's not rare at all because I made so many of them. But they got out of it. They would turn to a plan, and do write this down. It's called the Dawes Plan. I forgot to say the slide. D-A-W-E-S, the Dawes Plan. And that was basically a plan to American banks would American banks would buy German bonds, loan them money, and then the Germans would do what with those bonds? Pay off the reparations. Meaning, what happened? And that didn't affect the inflation, but they had more debt. And then when Hitler took power, they just said the hell with the reparations. Germany would pay it back. I think 6 years ago they finally paid back the reparations. Yeah.
Why would America do that if they were so isolationist? Why would they be like here?
Well, America set the plan because they thought if the Germans couldn't pay back the reparations, the instability might lead to another war.
Oh,
and then the other thing is banks are like, ooh, we can charge high interest for this. Then, of course, when Germany didn't pay it back, those bonds were worthless. But I guess then again, the people who made they still got paid. Remember, these are corporations. So, what of Hitler? Remember Hitler? Hitler, who was wounded, mustard gas. When the war ended, he was in a hospital. He came out, and it was over. And he was very disillusioned. He actually joined some of these street gangs. He, like a lot of them, didn't know anything else but to fight. He actually joined the communists and fought with the communists in Bavaria, then joined the Free Corps and fought against the communists. He just wanted to fight. He caught the eye of German military intelligence of the new Weimar Republic, who recruited him to be a spy. And to spy on these right-wing parties, because there were a couple of coup attempts by the right wing, one called the APUSH. He was recruited to spy on these right-wing parties, like his membership card, Adolf Hitler, for the German Workers' Party. He was a spy. It turned out that the spy liked the party and eventually joined the party, quit being a spy, and became its leader. Isn't that pretty amazing how he started as a spy and became the leader? And then, partially as a recruiting tactic, socialism was very popular. They included these words to the German Workers' Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They're not socialists. They hate socialists. But socialism is very popular in Germany. And everybody called them National Socialists. That's National Socialists. But if you take the first two letters of nationalist and then the two middle letters of socialist in German, it's ZI. So the abbreviation for parties and those kind of things would become Nazi. So that's where that comes from. The Nazis are National Socialists. And right-wing fascist party. Hitler started out as a spy. It's a tiny little right-wing party, and there were about 20 little tiny right-wing parties in Germany at this time. They didn't have winner-take-all. They were proportional. So that had a lot of parties. Remember, the U.S. is winner-take-all, so we just have two. They had a lot. And there's Hitler, or those are some of the Nazis right before their attempt to overthrow the government. Here is meeting in a beer hall called the Hofbrauhaus. And Hitler met there. That's how they recruited him. Trying to recruit veterans in World War I, they bring them in and give them beer and food in a beer hall. And that's in Munich, Germany. Yeah.
You've been to the Hofbrauhaus.
Well, yes, I have, and I've been to the Opera House in Munich too. Yeah, it's like now it's like a big tourist trap. And when I was there the first time in 2001, the first time for me, I did something. It is, I'm not kidding, one of the greatest walking tours you could ever take. But it's called the infamous Nazi walking tour. And I told you, I think I told you about it. Yeah, and it's fantastic. It was a great walking tour. It was really funny. It was a great tour, and my tour guide was Australian. I just thought it was funny. But she was great. But we went into the Opera House. And it's one of those places you walk through it, and you go in the upstairs, which is only for special parties. And there were still some fascist symbols on the wall. No swastikas, but other symbols still up there. And they said, you got to go back. So we had to go back there and have dinner with them that night. And it's a touristy place. You know, you all go there. So we went back to the Opera House, and she told me to look out for something. And you know what lederhosen are? Lederhosen, that kind of suspenders and the short, very Bavarian clothes. So look for these elderly men. So we're talking the 70s. And they haven't been to Opera House forever. And they have these big, huge, like 2-liter steins of beer and walk around. And these old men, and they said they're very friendly and gregarious, but she's like, just watch them. Just watch them. And told them what to look for. So we got there, and it just crowd, just crazy with people. There's an oompa band playing, like playing polkas, like a tuba, baritone, in the background. It's a funny place. Well, I saw one of these guys in his nice green lederhosen. He's walking around with this big thing. And he's talking to tourists. They're taking their picture with this guy. And then there'd be another guy look just like him. These elderly men. Maybe, and they kind of, and then they'd be talking like this, like this. And, did you catch that? This is illegal in Germany, like the swastika. So like, the old Nazis kind of acknowledged each other, so hang out at the Opera House. So that's when I saw German Nazis. I tell you what, it was pretty, and then he came to our table. I was like, you're a Nazi. But anyways, and the thing about that is we went there and I had a camera. But this is 2001. We didn't have digital camera, we had a 35mm camera. And I literally had taken my last picture and I had more film. I so badly wanted to get the Nazi. So when I went back there again, about 7 years later, none of them left. At least they weren't there that night. So that was it that? Yeah, but that was in Berlin where I was walking with my wife and my sister-in-law. She lives in Berlin. And they were recruited by the neo-Nazi party. So moving on. Yeah. They came right to her. I mean, right to them. They went right past me. Blonde hair, blue-eyed. And I threw away the pamphlet. I was so mad at myself. So mad at myself. So, the beer hall putsch, they decided to overthrow the government. A putsch means a coup. And they thought they could take advantage of this hyperinflation. And using old members of the Free Corps with still their uniforms, they could overthrow the government of Munich. And yes, you see Hitler in the lederhosen. All right. What do you mean? Yeah, there's a lot of good looks for Hitler. But it was a dismal film. Absolutely dismal film. They were arrested, charged with treason. You know, they were absolutely delusional. Here's a picture of them in front of the Opera House in Munich. This is driving through the streets of Munich. You can go to this spot. That's also where they had the big rally, 1914 for the war. And there's Hitler right before. Remember Ludendorff, the guy who came up with the term total war? He was going to be the figurehead of the government. He wasn't arrested. They let him go. He was quite insane by then. But Hitler was arrested and charged with treason. And he could have got the death penalty. But he got a sympathetic, far right-wing judge. So a sympathetic judge just gave him a little bit of prison time. And there he is in prison. I just put Landesberg prison. I don't know why I left it in there. Like, I was thinking I don't want to forget the name of it. But the prison, he allowed to have his private secretary, Rudolf Hess, and other friends in here. See him with lederhosen on too. And he had like a private room, furnished. He had curtains on the windows. He had food brought in. because Hitler made friends. The party remained tiny for the rest of the decade. Especially almost died when he went to prison. But some of the wealthiest industrialists, fearful of communism, started giving him money. Remember how some of the wealthiest people want to overthrow Roosevelt? It was a similar dynamic. And no, they might not have realized what was going to happen, but they also were thinking this will protect our money, we can make more. And so, in prison, he would write Mein Kampf.
Yeah. What separated Hitler from any of the other alt-right groups? He said that there were 20 of them. So what made him such a leader?
Well, he had this gift to speak to people, to rally people. He was like one of them. That's part of the reason why he's recruited, not because he was brilliant or smart, but he just had this common touch. He was a decorated World War I veteran, but he was just a corporal, so he wasn't like an elite. His Austrian accent actually helped him because he didn't speak like elite high German. So all those things helped him. And also, his followers were completely ruthless.
Okay.
And so Mein Kampf, it reads exactly like it was dictated. A man walking around a prison cell, ranting and raving. There's no real logic to it. I had to read it once for a class and I read it for a couple other things, and it's horrible to read. Not only for what it says, but just it's horrible to read. It's talking about the Versailles and the evils of Jews, and then it goes page after page about syphilis. You're like, what the heck? How did we get here? And then back to something else. And it's just all over the place. But one important thing to get about Mein Kampf, Hitler had this understanding. He was smart, but certainly nothing special. Not the most brilliant man. He understood propaganda. He understood how it worked, how to speak to people. Now, he had very social Darwinism, so he believed people were stupid. So treat them like they're dumb. Keep it simple and repeat it over and over and over again, just like every advertising, right? Keep it simple and repeat it. And he was talking about the stab in the back. One of his most famous statements, and it is true, and he would use it to get his ends. I put it up here. That's from Mein Kampf. The great masses of the people will more easily fall victims to a big lie than a small lie. Big lies stick. They linger. They go on. Even if they don't believe it, it's there. But another thing about the big lie, why it's such a great propaganda tool, if I tell you a bunch of little lies, you're like, oh, okay, you're not sure. But let's say I tell you a big lie. You're like, God, that's a big lie. Then how could he be so audacious to tell a big lie? He would never do that unless it must be true. And it works. It lingers. There must be some truth to it. And he lied about everything, always lied. And so if you never really know the truth, it's great propaganda. He understood that. The rest of it, no. He lucked out. He was audacious, brave, ruthless, but not the smartest hack. And as time went on, he was surrounded by just absolute cronies who were morons. Which, by the way, should give us all a little bit of calm, a little bit of startle us a bit on what I meant to say. They nearly won. And they were strong. The Nazi leadership were just a bunch of cronies and idiots. Scary. So, with that, let's get to the ideology. That's in Munich after it. I think that's always a good picture. So, let's get to it. And we've already talked about these, so we just narrow it down, and this fits right in with fascism. Number one, the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, they blamed the Versailles for everything, so we need to talk about that again. And don't forget, we would never have signed it if not for the stab in the back. And here's two more pictures of it. Who does this represent? Communists. They knew, they could always say Jews, but communists was the one that would get middle class and wealthy people behind them. Two, who did it? We have to find a scapegoat. Remember I told you about fascism is defined by their enemies? Here, we demonize somebody who's not like us, that xenophobic idea. And remember, I talked about like the Klan and the US went through an element of this. Any country can do this. We don't like to think, that's somebody else. Or as people I know from Germany will say, well, just the Nazis. No, it can happen anywhere. And who are the enemies? Just like the fascists. And then some businessmen, especially bankers, I think you know where that's coming from, right? but also the Slavs. Remember where the Slavs live. The biggest Slavic country is also communist, isn't it? The Soviet Union. What's the second biggest Slavic country? Poland. These inferior people, and if they're inferior, they must be somebody living with them that directs them, who also happen to be maybe bankers, maybe leading liberals and liberal philosophers, and certainly many communists. Who's behind all of them? Who's behind all of them? This is a caricature of it. Jews. This is a poster made during the war, and it's awful caricature of a Jewish banker supposed to be behind the big three allies of Britain, US, and Soviet Union. Jews. The population of Jews were less than 1 million in Germany. Not a huge population, completely assimilated into German society. You know, there are significantly larger populations in Poland, and the Soviet Union had the largest population. Even though the largest city, or the largest population of Jews that lived in one city was in New York City. That's where most of the Jewish immigrants went. And so whenever, and we'll talk a little bit more, we'll see this and talk about a little bit more on Friday about the final solution. Those are Jews out there as they conquered. It wasn't so much in Germany, it was areas they conquered. So it wasn't like the German Jews have no, that wasn't what happened. But there's not very many of them. That makes them relatively, and they're pretty assimilated. So it's easy to demonize somebody who's kind of a small little group, because how do they fight back? And since it is such a racist time, it fit in. It must be this little group. And this little group doesn't really, okay, wow. And we act like Germans, so what's the big deal? In fact, the officer who recommended Hitler for his Iron Cross was Jewish in World War I. So, why are they mad at us? Why do they hate us? These scapegoats? Because we're a master race. That fit in with the Italian master race, and those are Aryans. We've talked about this before. Remember I talked about German culture, and all this is just garbage, science-y stuff. And that poster on the left is the idealized German family. Hitler did not like impressionist or abstract art. And that is Hitler Youth. And a few years ago at Special Topics, we did a unit on the Cold War. And the kid, one girl made a bombshell. Like a bomb, and she put a family in, which were a couple of the, had a Barbie doll and Ken. And she left the Barbie doll for me. And I just, oh. Do you know what goose stepping is? Has anyone ever heard of goose stepping? If you're watching the video, they showed it a couple times, might not know it was called that. Some armies still do it, but now not in Germany. But it was a very formal march they would do where they don't bend their legs. So this is goose stepping, they like that. North Koreans still do that? Yeah, North Korea still does that. And then, yeah, just a couple weeks ago, they showed some of the North Korean guards, and I saw that. So, no, just look at this, right? That's Nazi Barbie. Can you believe that? And she left. She goose stepped right along. I want you to think. Look. Humans don't come like this. This was a human that could be like 3 feet long. But anyways. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say. Nazi Barbie. That terrified me when I discovered. Okay, so, and this led, they stole this idea of selective breeding called eugenics to make sure there would be no race mixing of inferior races, to keep the races pure. In fact, they even set up breeding stations where they bring young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed women to be bred to have good German children. And they really emphasize that. And this is a German propaganda that's showing like Jews or Slav, and look how fast they breed. And you see how they draw the faces? You notice that? But Germans will be outnumbered unless we start reading, make sure there's no mixing. Yeah.
So I don't get about like Hitler, it's like Net and all that, because he likes all that wrong.
Well, that's a German ideal. It was then. That was a German, that culture, remember culture. But also, he does have blue eyes. And two more things about it. First off, they got eugenics for the United States. Hitler liked a lot of American racial policy, which should not be a pleasant thought for all of us. And secondly, German scientists were given the task of finding the perfect Aryan face, because that's a very good question. So they measured like the forehead, the bridge of the nose, and all this stuff to come up with the perfect idealized face. So maybe they might not have blonde hair, but they can still be Aryan. And this might shock you, but guess who had the perfect Aryan face? No way! That's science. The Nazis hated science unless it matched their ideology. Which, another one, like, it's a good thing they hated science. The scientists who invented or came up with the atomic bomb, most of them fled Nazi Germany. Yeah.
So did the scientists just say that Hitler had the perfect face so that they wouldn't get like tortured, or that was true? He actually did have the perfect face.
Well, first off, there's no such thing as a perfect face, so they made it all up. But it was a combination of they knew he was paying the check. They knew, and also they kind of believed the garbage. So they wanted to believe it. And if you want to believe something, you can make anything.
Okay.
It's like the Harry Truman quote about statistics. You can come up with math for that. You know the Harry Truman quote? There are lies, and then there are damned lies, and then there are statistics. Okay, so with that, last thing, we got the leader principle. When you get the Lebens wrong. And we talked about the leader before with Mussolini. And that's Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer. The leader, der Führer. All that means is, Mussolini was El Duce, the leader. Franco, when he took power in Spain, was El Supremo. He died in 1976 and is still dead. And you notice how Hitler then speaks. Look at the people behind. They're nothing but just kind of, aren't they just a mass? Because he speaks for the people. Why don't they get started? Starting to get as far as I want. I blame Nazi Barbie. By the way, why would you make a goose-stepping Barbie unless you wanted Nazis? You want to see it one more time?
No.
One more time! I'm just. You don't have a degree. Let me try. All you do is real life. Okay. All you do is just kind of move it along, just kind of move it forward. Now yeah, you just move her along like this. She goose steps. Is that the weirdest thing?
That's so terrible.
Huh? Yeah.
That's terrible, but it's everything I've ever wanted.
I don't like this.
Nazi Barbie.
It's a children's show.
What's that?
Penguin's Communist Adventures.
Are we not in the library?
Where?
Here. But it's okay, so Penguin is like a show for like kids, but and somebody's like
Edit it to okay.
And it's terrible, but it's my favorite thing ever. It is.
Huh? A little bit. I like that. You might knock it down.
That's why I specifically like had two people on each side.
Well, that's. You see why the map is so dinged in the corner? It's fallen down more than once. Yeah, they don't make these maps. But this one's like 35%. This one's probably 15. That map is pretty worthless.
Alex, I'm going to see right now.
Mr. Partridge, I don't have that big, all the information on there. They grab you for like twice.
Yeah.
Hey, we have two rules. Well, you can't use it.
And then this one doesn't have near as much stuff. This map actually is pretty good. This map is.
This is the new one, though.
Can I get a kiss from that?
You need a map?
He's the top, it's the only one that gets.
Huh?
That's fine.
Oh, second map.
You can take over my time.
Wait, let's talk. It's like, we should talk.
I have to talk.
You really?
And I have to play two cameras.
I feel like
Mr. Yolo is not going to be happy.
Well, you can talk to Mr. Larson then.
Does anyone want to talk?
By the way, Alex, I don't mind stealing money from you, but why were you going to give it to Mr. Viola?
For NHS.
Oh,
Then it's a lot.
I know it.
Oh, it's fine.
2 of the 3 officers. Hey,
did you give it to Norris? Oh my God. You better not give it to me. No offense. All right. So we will talk about the map. I like the crown. Why? With a crown.
Yeah.
Are you playing a role in it? Macbeth. Okay, so a couple things in first off. I said I would give you the first, how long? 6 minutes in class to finish up. Okay, so you got 10 minutes right now to work on the map, and then we are going to talk about we're going to go from there. You got 10 minutes. Go. 9, 7, 4.
He's very sporadic.
Am I now? Got that money back. Sure.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to give you, well, maybe a little bit on Friday. You want a little bit on Friday?
I don't know.
You don't need, I'm going to collect it on Monday. I'm going to give everyone 10 minutes from right now. 10 minutes. The clock is running. If you don't use it, you lose it. I don't know why I look at my wrist. I've only broken this wrist once. This wrist. Yeah. They routed British Australian forces like 10 times the What? Marshall? Oh, Marshall, right next to NAB. I'm just going to tell them that's my kid.
I literally just feel like this. Mother guys, I've been down to.
Is that one have the battles on it?
No.
Yeah, that's fine. Hey, for the labeling, I'll let you decide which map to put it on, whichever one's the least fun. That's not okay?
We, there's ACT, and then there's one.
ACT, everyone. Well, I tell you what, some people are making a lot of money on their own ACTs. And it's not me.
Same, remember.
There are are people that do that, and it's highly.
Oh,
Are you done? Oh, good.
Should we switch spots over there?
Huh?
No. Okay, can I switch spots?
No.
If you can find out everything on the map.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
So you don't need to think. Wait, Mr.
I got no.
Wait, Mariah, you got all that.
Oh, so I'm gonna laminate the Beatles. By the way, I forgot to tell you two things. First off, yes, Nazi Barbie made an appearance today in class. And Dylan gave me a cap, a German.
Well, actually, it's World War II.
Yeah, it's the pre-World War II, and this little thing flap comes out, so I can. I think it's a replica, but might not be. Does that look good? No. And by the way, we do have a new poster going up.
That thing's awesome. I want.
Tasha, this is very nice. This is from Nolans. Oh, look at that. Because even though it's probably not the real thing, but it's a great replica. I like it. It's probably not an original.
No, it is.
It is. Okay, you got 7 minutes left. So I gave all day yesterday.
We also got all day in class.
All day in class yesterday. If you weren't here, I know, I'm sorry. Yes. It was split in half, and the Soviets got the whole thing after.
And then Solomon Island.
Solomon Island, that's a Guadalcanal. So that. Some of the most awful fighting of the war. Oh, Sophie, China's an ally. China's an ally. And you gotta remember, like, okay, like British colonies, so India. Where's the American colony?
I don't like writing over the lines.
For the most part, it's not pretty good.
My grandmother was
Oh, really? So it's part of that. Wow.
Yes.
After the war. Oh, wow. You know, I think I need to
I definitely think that. Today, we're going
I bet there's a lot of stuff. Zero bodies. That's amazing. Because that's probably Oh, really? I can see that.
I couldn't even teach. Oh my God,
You're like, it is due on Monday, but that's why I say, yes, you're more than welcome to take a picture of this.
yeah, that was.
Okay, I'm sorry about this, but Corridor is a tiny little island that's right there. What happened was, it was basically this granite mountain on the island. And they put a bunch of tunnels in, so it was basically a fortified island. It was the last place the Americans held out. Yeah. Corridor is just a little dot just south of Baton. I think I got that. Just right there. Well, it was a battle too, but it was like this base. Just imagine like a granite island. So the Americans put a bunch of tunnels in it like that. It'd be like a mile fortified. And so when the Americans surrendered in May of 42, that was a mile. And it felt really good.
Oh, I think I only have one. Yeah, I only have one.
But I just handed out the other.
No, that's good.
Well, I was thinking there was like a backside.
I was gonna say, I looked at that habit of, and, the best thing about.
Right.
But it didn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it actually kind of does. The other half is roll.
Yeah.
And it would be hot. And
That's what.
that's really good.
The other one that I had.
You wish you were in Mr.
Oh, yes.
So you did the exact same thing.
Yeah. So it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were.
Right
Like,
up.
you, thank you. I know.
I got an email for, I remember we did it originally. So we talked on one side, the other talked about the other side. Oh, yeah. It was simply split for occupations and then for
There were like two that I could not find.
yeah, this one is just literally. But then you know how it's not curved now, so it's not curved out, which never ends. Anything else? I'd be glad, you know? You have about 3 minutes? Yes.
No, and then my grandmother went to California because my grandfather lived there. And then.
Are you looking for?
The other one.
I know it's the problem with so many words, but yeah, we're all under credit. It was a,
Are we, that sounds like a hawk.
well, technically, like last year, I would call it.
Yeah, like a historical hawk.
The Japanese took it.
I was in Australia.
That's my
I will.
all my
Only debtors.
They sent the people, the
That's Ohio.
criminals.
Mostly debtors.
I don't even know what that is.
Can't pay back. Yeah, there used to be.
Oh, debtors.
Debtors.
Oh, you're saying dead.
Oh, no. But like, and then they sent a few political prisoners, like they, to Tasmania.
Oh, boy.
The man is statues in front of our capital, sent there. He escaped.
And Japan was like.
Okay, just a couple more minutes. I'll be glad to answer any more questions in the form of interpretive dance. So clear space.
Where is?
Any we talk. That's yeah. So
This is the bill.
Pachuca, that's called it's Manchuria, but the Japanese renamed it Manchuria. Yeah, they created a polygon with the last emperor of China.
So like.
Huey. Huh? In a way, yeah. No, thank you. And so, all right, we're about Nearing none. It looks like you got it all. Gosh.
Where are the Allied Europeans?
Where is,
Okay, the big thing with the Allied air offensive, does everyone pay attention so I know what I'm looking for? The Allied air offensive I'm talking about is basically when they took the Marianas Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, and have some indication where they would take this and bomb Japanese cities. So something showing the, like, that's where the air offensive was. And if you look on that map and see where Iwo Jima is, part of the reason they took Iwo Jima, I don't know if it was worth it, but to be a base for fighter planes to escort the bombers. And also for damaged bombers. So this would be due on Monday. I give you a day, a long time. If you want the last pictures of the map. Okay. What's that?
Because there was a battle of Aleutian Island and then there was an Aleutian Island.
Yeah, there was a battle of Aleutian. I should have just put it once, that's part of the thing I kind of did part, then
I read it twice.
I was in my study hall. I need a study hall. And I kind of would do a part, then do something else, or get distracted looking at news. That's why, for example, Leyte Golf, the Battle of Java Seas on there twice. I didn't realize that. And Leyte Golf, Battle of Leyte Golf. Of course, there actually was two battles. There was a Battle of Leyte Island and the Battle of Leyte Golf.
and there was Malaya.
Well, Malaya, you can't have the Malayas. Last question, anything on the map? Any particular question you want to ask? All right, let's finish up Lobel proper, and then we're going to watch part of a movie.
Which part?
The best part. So, ow. Oh, I filmed that. That was great. That'll be exciting for people.